While researching local history, I looked for the earliest story I can find about Turnbull Canyon. I stumbled across this story in the Whittier News, dated November 10th, 1900. Two men who had worked in the oil fields above Whittier were chased down Turnbull Canyon by what may as well have been a monster. But before I dive right into that part of the story, I think I should set the stage a little bit. Before the turn of the 19th century, Turnbull Canyon looked like a completely different place. On one side of the hills, you had the new town of Whittier that was only 2 years old. On the other side were the Puente Hills and the blustering walnut and orange groves of North Whittier Heights. In the year 1900, prosperity in this region exploded when the black gold of oil was added to its already blooming citrus and walnut industries. Massive fortunes could be made. Oil fever had struck these blossoming communities. Landowners of the time were drilling on their own land hoping to strike oil. Some succeeded, but many failed. Other landowners, distrustful of oil hopes, sold to speculators and lived to regret it. One speculator was a resident of Whittier, Aubrey Wardman. Aubrey took a gamble and poured his entire life savings of $100,000 into buying potential oil land. Aubrey struck oil. 6 months later, that land had become worth $3 million. The Wardman gusher produced 11,000 barrels of oil per day. It was said that Wardman's first monthly check from Norman Shaeff, owner of Shaeff Noble Oil, the driller for North Whittier Oil Company, was for $100,000, the same amount as his initial investment. The North Whittier Oil Company's well was just over the top of the foothills, to the east of Whittier. Back then, the hills quickly became covered in oil derricks on both sides. Turnbull Canyon Road wouldn't be installed for another 13 years, so oil field workers on the Puente side would have to hike over miles of hills and canyons to get to the job. On the Whittier side, there was a crude road carved out of the hillsides, just wide enough for a horse-pulled wagon to squeeze its way through the hills. Oil field workers were a new breed of man. They took on a job that was filled with excitement and danger. Working in these oil fields was a dirty and exhausting job. Although most of them are nameless, they were the backbone of the oil boom. In 1900, 50 cents a day was considered a good wage. An experienced driller could earn as much as $15 a day. A skilled helper, called a roughneck, got a little less. These men were well aware that they faced death every day: fire, gas fumes, or falling from an oil derrick. These were dangers they could prepare for. However, one evening, two Whittier men, Norman Shaeff, owner of Shaeff Noble Oil, and his associate, Fred DuVall, found out that there were more dangers to working in Turnbull Canyon than mechanical failings or explosions. It was quitting time. The two men loaded the back of their wagon with their tools and gear. Norman climbed into the driver's seat and grabbed the reins. Fred jumped into the back of the wagon. As the sun began to set, the two exhausted men made their way down Turnbull Canyon. After a hard day's work, the bumpy ride down Turnbull Canyon seemed long. They would take it slow. The dirt road through Turnbull Canyon was constructed by cutting into the side of the hills. The bank on the inside is high. On the outside, a horse was always liable to make a misstep and go rolling into the canyon. About a quarter way down the hill, something was wrong. The horses were spooked. They started to gallop. Norman tried to calm the horses, but it was clearly too late for that. Then the horses bolted. Neither Norman or Fred could stop them. They were determined to run. They were out of control. The horses veered around a sharp corner. The wagon's wooden wheels easily slid on the dirt road. Fred was thrown to the back. When he sat up and looked to the left, their nightmare worsened. He couldn't believe what he was seeing bounding along the high bank on the inside of the road. To his horror, he yelled out to Norman, "Mountain lion." Norman cracked the whip above the horses' heads and let them run. The ride was a wild one, not only because of the large brute giving chase, but also on account of the dangerous road over which they were driving. The horses flew around curves and down through the canyon, but the lion was just as fast and leaped at one of the horses. Norman cracked his whip at the lion. Fred looked in the back of the wagon for a weapon. As he reached for a bucket, he realized this lion wasn't alone. A second lion had been sweeping the rear. The lion was between the cliffside edge of the road and the wagon. The second mountain lion leaped at Fred. Fred hit the lion in the head with the bucket. The wagon rounded an inside curve, smacking into hillside brush. They approach a barbed wire fence which cornered an oncoming curve in the road at the entrance of the canyon. They rush by the barbed wire. The lion at the rear of the wagon leaps and is caught up in the barbed wire and is momentarily stopped. Fred and Norman round the last curve, holding on for their lives. They could see the final straightaway leading into the city. Once they reached level road, the men begin to pull away. It isn't until the two men pull into Whittier that the lions give up the chase and disappear into the hills. Fred and Norman's wild ride had come to an end. The odds had been against them, but they had survived. They were chased for nearly 2 miles by a pair of mountain lions down a dangerous canyon road. Luck was on their side. The next morning, Fred and Norman returned to the mouth of the canyon. They had found the lion's tracks. They measured 3.5 inches across the toes. Some of the young men from Whittier organized a lion hunt, but came up empty-handed. After that night, Fred and Norman knew that there were more dangers to working in Turnbull Canyon than they had previously thought. From that day forward, they both carried double-barreled shotguns loaded with buckshot in both chambers. They were never unarmed when they ventured into the infamous Turnbull Canyon. Getting to the bottom of a story or myth can be an adventure in itself. If you have a mystery you would like to solve, I suggest you find out for yourself. Discover the information you're looking for at your local library today.